Hello everyone, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel. This is Abram, and today we're here to answer the question that has perplexed many generations.
The question that's never been asked before, ever.
No, never been asked, but we're here to answer it. And that is, what is indie? What does indie mean in the context of indie video games? Something that Abram and I have played a lot of. If you're watching this video, you're vastly familiar with probably 100 plus or 200 plus or 500 plus indie games. But I say that, and we're all like, oh, of course, but like, which ones are indie, and why are they indie, and what aspects of different games add up to this amalgam that is this amorphous, confusing, very divisive term that we use constantly, but nobody can truly agree on what it means. And so we're here today to have Abram and I put in our thoughts and also bring in a bunch of community members' submissions and thoughts on trying to narrow down how do we talk about indie? Why is it important for the term to have a definition? How has the definition evolved? This is going to be, frankly, how many seconds can you curse into a video without getting demonetized? Oh, we're not going to make any money.
I don't think it matters anymore. Yeah,
this
that rule is gone.
Oh, really?
How many indie games do you think you've played in your life?
Oh, shit. Well, I just saw on... So I was logging some DS games on Backlog this morning.
Such as put this on the record.
Such as Babysitting Mania. I was gonna play Brain Boost Beta Wave, but I decided to put that back on the shelf, and I took My Fun Facts Coach off the shelf.
Bear in mind, you're logging these because you have them in real life and you've been playing them.
And I have played a little bit of them.
Yeah, okay.
Which, by the way, I bought My Fun Facts Coach because I'm like, that's insane that Ubisoft made this.
Sure.
It's not fun facts. It's like life advice. It's like, if you're doing public speaking, change your tone of voice in this way. Or like, if you are a woman going out to like a barbecue, what kind of dress should you wear? Like, I'm not even joking. Like,
sure. I mean, what else would it be? A coach for fun facts is a fucking stupid premise for a job, for a game. So that's about as exciting as I thought it would be.
I was just perplexed by it. But I was on Backlog, and I was logging the fact that I had played these games, that I knew a little bit about them, and I noticed that I'd played 1,575 games in my life. And, true numbers somewhere around there. I think that's pretty accurate. And I would say maybe 600 of those are indie games in whatever capacity that means. The definition is vague, but I would say that I play a lot of indie games. I've probably played over... or somewhere near 50 indie games this year, or especially in the last few years. And so the numbers are pretty high. And so it's something that I have a long-standing history with, long-standing relationship with, if you will. But even though I've been in a relationship with these games for so long, I don't even know who they are. I gotta get to know them a little bit better.
Yeah, but you're nervous to ask indie games to go steady.
That's true.
You're trying to figure that out today if it's time.
Yeah.
I don't know how many indie games I've played. Probably 10.
10? I would say a little higher, but, more in like the 15 range for you.
So
why do you ask that, though?
I'm just curious. Genuine curiosity.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not useful.
Well, here's the thing. Usually when you ask me a question, though, there's some sort of ulterior motive to it. There's like some nefarious, like you're trying to weasel something out of me to like do a gotcha, and so I was
really just curious what you would say, because you play so many indie games. But I think it is important, sort of as we get into this, to sort of caveat two things. One, I think the reason we're having this conversation right now is in part because the Game Awards nominees recently came out, and there's been sort of a little bit of the annual hullabaloo about what is or isn't indie has sort of,
it's like when they defrost Mariah Carey from the ice block every year. It's one of those, or like the cicadas. No, those happen every 7 years, right? Something like that.
You can, but the point is, regardless, you can put it on the calendar.
Yes. You're like, there will be definition of indie game discourse approximately around, when is Geoff Keighley revealing the Game Awards nominees this year?
but I think we should also, beyond sort of giving that context, kind of make the stakes clear for us. And so I guess a good place to start is just like, from your point of view, before we really get into anything, before we get into the submissions you've gotten, with the writer, that your opinion can change over the course of the conversation.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
What are you thinking? What do you think? What's the significance of this conversation to you? Why do you care to try and define indie?
I care to have this conversation because it is something that is so controversial. I don't think that people, from what I've seen, usually sit down and try to dissect it, try to understand where the term has changed over the years, where standards for things have changed, as the industry has changed over the years. And so I care to have it from like this sociological perspective of, I think it's very interesting that this term is so widely used but doesn't have a particularly clear definition. But as I've thought about this, because we talked about this idea almost a week ago, and I've really been thinking about it, doing a little bit of research, reading some articles, talking with friends online, and trying to figure out how I felt about it. And my answer that I've come down on is, I think the term is not particularly useful in it being anything specific. But I think that is, from my eyes, kind of an interesting thing, and maybe even a good thing, because what that indicates to me is that video games are diverse and interesting, and different sizes and combinations of publishers and people and team sizes and stuff can happen as the industry has evolved, and we've seen so many different combinations of people and publishers and team sizes come and make great games. The industry has evolved and morphed and formed, and so any kind of terminology that you try to throw at something and capture this ever-evolving, very diverse ecosystem and art form is largely useless. It's fruitless. And I like that because as I'm saying, it indicates a vibrant and evolving and diverse set of people that make a vibrant and diverse set of games.
Yeah. You want me to answer?
Yes.
So there's sort of two things that I come into the conversation feeling. One is a little bit chilly. I might have to put on a pullover. And the other is invested in, I think, above anything else, making sure that the small games that don't get the marketing, infrastructural, financial support of a lot of games that are considered indie but are of much more visibility, making sure they don't go by the wayside. I think that ultimately there's really no definition to land on with indie, and I don't necessarily think the goal of our conversation is to try and create one.
No. I lied at first when I said we were trying to answer it. Well, we are trying to, but we don't believe that we will.
No, because I think that indie at this point is something that's used cynically in many regards. I think that indie is just sort of a marketing term. I think it's something that sort of carries cachet. I don't think it really describes anything anymore. And a friend of ours, Murph, who is, I think, given some kind of contribution in this conversation.
Yes.
Sort of was talking about this idea that I think is very true of like indie kind of saying more about the audience it's trying to capture than about the game itself. And so I think we've sort of long lost the battle on indie in any way describing like a particular set of production considerations or anything. And so I don't really feel that motivated in that fight anymore. I think the only thing that's really important to me is that in what I would say could be fairly described as a sort of increasing construction of this alternate traditional publishing scheme in indie gaming, that we don't sort of forget the games that maybe are truer to that idea of true indie creation. The really small stuff that doesn't get sort of the attention it deserves. I care about making sure that those games still get that.
Yeah.
And
so do I. And I think one of the ways that this term in its usage is so divisive that I do think there is this. I'm going to use the word moralizing. I don't know if that's particularly accurate, but people put a lot, especially in our circles, in the games discussion industry passionate field and circles, use this term with their own definition to mean something very specific enough to where they like champion it, where they fight for it, where they think that it is something important. And part of the reason why this conversation is so divisive, why we got such a variety of opinions and responses, is because in this circle that are the people that responded to us, that we both exist in, people believe so heavily in that the divides can cause some sort of tension where it's like, no, you're using this word in the wrong way. It should mean this. And I agree that I think almost all of us come from this base place of we want to use terminology and properly support games that don't get support otherwise. What I will say is the perspective that I'm bringing into this, believing that indie game as of now is a useless enough and vague enough term to where I'm not particularly personally interested in like finding a specific definition. It doesn't mean that I don't want to champion games, but I don't think that reclaiming the word indie to mean something more specific is actually going to change how those smaller games made by very small teams without traditional publishers is going to actually, it's not going to change things reclaiming the word. And so that's why I'm like, I will fight for those games in many other ways. I will make lists of them. I will do interviews for them. I will write articles. I will play them myself. I will upload YouTube videos about them, talk to them about friends, champion them when I'm at PAX and things like that. But that, all of that for me is, my passion for it is separate from my personal drive to quote unquote reclaim the term indie to mean something more specific.
I think it's just hard because what that would suggest, right, is if we are, and I think what you mean when you say this, is this idea of sort of pulling indie back to mean games that are truly made independently.
Yeah.
And wouldn't have, so, for instance, it would be disqualifying to call a game published by Devolver indie under this more specific definition.
Yeah.
That then opens up, I think, in my view, much harder can of worms of, well, then what is a game made by Devolver? Mm-hmm. What is that if it's not indie, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that if we were to sort of obey, if we were to sort of obey these harder, more specific definitions, we'd have to invent a lot more terminology than I think the space is capable of maintaining. And I think that it's partially just because what I was saying before of like there is a real, I think, marketability to indie and to development that can be perceived as small. Sure. And I don't mean for this to sound like as jaded as it might sound, but we sort of had conversations earlier this year about the way that at Summer Game Fest, for instance, Geoff Keighley is talking about a game made by one person, none of their friends, right? Mm-hmm. I think that there's that for longer than just this year, it's been in vogue to be indie, to be outside of the traditional publishing system. And that sort of cachet, I think, has sort of led to an environment where we have kind of papered over the fact that Devolver Digital, for instance, and by the way, I love most games I play that Devolver publishes. This isn't a slight. Right. It's just a fact that they're a publicly traded company. And there's an interesting interview with Stephen Totillo and the lead developer behind Ball Pit recently about how when Ball Pit came to be a Devolver game, there's an interesting point of friction where the developer was actually going to finish the game sooner than Devolver would have been able to release and support it. So they went back to the dev and said, hey, can you actually spend an extra year on the game? And so that's not necessarily a bad thing by any means, but it's an illustration of the fact that the way that a indie game like Ball Pit is moving is that it is getting a lot of visibility through like a deal with Game Pass and a lot of money from that. It's getting big funding from a publicly traded publisher and Devolver. They're getting kind of told when to finish or not finish the game. And so that doesn't quite feel so authentically indie. But we don't have any way to describe what it is if it's not. And so I just think it's important to understand that even though we might be, I think, willing to extend a broad definition of indie, I think that from my point, that's like a provisional position, because I think that there is a problem here, but I don't really know how you would go about resolving that.
Yeah, I think I can extend the olive branch and agree a little bit on that. The terminology is vague enough to include a broad scope of things that do definitely reflect different realities of team size, budget, scope, production, financing, and that means that what that means is that you cannot know if you say indie if it has X amount of people working on it, if it was published by someone, if it has a certain kind of funding, if it fits into a certain like literal genre of the game, because indie is something we can kind of describe as a genre and has been used in that way in the past, but that's not particularly accurate. It's a vibes genre in the way that maybe horror is, as opposed to like gameplay genres, right? Like there's different things that or at least it can be. Like, I think that is an issue, but I think it's only an issue if you expect indie, or frankly, if you expect like big bucket terms to be more specific than they actually are. Because for me, as someone as informed and appreciative of the breadth of the industry as I am, I'm okay with a term being vague, because then it incentivizes in me a little bit more research, right? If I call a game indie, yes, that can mean many things, but for this game in specific, what does it mean? What is the publishing reality behind it? How did the team of what size team up with someone, with a publisher? If they were, how did they get their money to do this? What was the release structure like? The term being vague, and I don't, maybe this is just me projecting, but on a personal level, it does incentivize a little more curiosity, as I want to engage with it a little bit deeper to find out, yes, it might be a part of this larger bucket, but what does it mean specifically for this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because you're talking about this sort of like detective work of trying to figure out production information about a game.
Yeah.
And that is not really like the gaming industry is not set up in a way that makes that especially easy often.
That is true.
Because like we're both big fans of film, and a lot of information about how films are made and distributed is a lot more public.
Yes.
Firstly, a lot of indie film is going to go through the festival circuit, and there's going to be a very visible competition for it among distributors.
Yeah.
A lot of film, be it indie or massive Hollywood blockbuster stuff, the budgets are going to come out. A lot of this stuff in games either happens in back rooms on the publishing distribution side, or it's never ever made public at all unless there's some kind of data breach on the budget side, right? And so I think part of the issue with this conversation, also not the conversation we're having with the broad topic, is just that it has to come down to vibes and interpretation, because it's simply not feasible
to actually define it. If there were to be boundaries, we would need to then set the boundaries by whatever higher power is able. If Geoff Keighley came down and was like, this is what indie means, and then suddenly there is this definition, then to your point, things on the edges of that, this is what I've been thinking about so much these last few days.
Sure.
Is if there were to be a more strict definition of indie, how do you then account for things that are in a little bit of a gray zone? If the information isn't totally public, if people, if it's about team size, what about people that joined the team and then left the team? What about outsourcing work? What about like the QA testers? How do you count that? They're not hired by the company, but they're paid. Like, game production is incredibly nebulous, and it is ever evolving to be even more so as more and more types of development enter the industry. And that means that it becomes cloudier and cloudier in a way that I think is almost not worth like fighting through to find a specific like rigid set of definitions for this.
Well, let's because we've established the nebulosity of the issue.
Yes.
Let's pull up a hot button issue and let's use this as a way to involve our perspectives. Tucker, James Hazel. I'm dropping middle name in the video.
That's me. Hey, what's up? Don't hack me now.
For you, just for you, in your mind, in your heart, in your soul, in your limbic system, is Expedition 33 an indie game?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that...
And why? And for you, why?
And for me, why? I think, number one, something that I might have been clear from the beginning, but I want to establish now, is I do think that publishing does not... having a publisher does not preclude a game from being indie. It does preclude it from being independently published or self-published. Those are terms that do not describe something that has a external publisher. But it does not preclude it from being indie. And as I will delve a little bit deeper into some examples that make this this cloud specific in my mind of like, okay, I think it can encompass both. So that's number one, is the fact that Kepler Interactive published Sandfall Interactive's game, Clair Obscura Expedition 33, does not preclude it. I think that the amount of people that work at the studio is one of the defining traits that people will use in any regard to describe something as an indie game. Is how big is the group of people making it? What kind of support do they have within the team? And Expedition 33 is a curious one where the team employed by Sandfall Interactive full-time to make the game is surprisingly comparable to a lot of games teams that make smaller games. Yacht Club Games, Supergiant, these more established teams that are totally independent, do not have publishers, self-publish their own games, have been working for a long time, have grown to about the size that Sandfall Interactive is at. And so team size is it does fit into that. And then also on the publisher side, and that's very cloudy, and I think something people don't necessarily think too hard about, is publisher is not a cut and dry, oh, it's a big thing or not. There are very different sizes of publishing teams, and surprisingly, actually, Kepler Interactive, Kepler's a really weird one that like kind of exists its own bubble. Kepler is actually a lot smaller than a lot of publishers that people consider more specifically indie. Devolver's one of the long-standing ones that make a lot of games that people consider indie games and have for a long time. Kepler is like a fifth of the size of Devolver, and so like
and structured very differently.
It's structured very differently.
Indie studios.
Yes, and Kepler's a great example of what I was saying earlier of the evolving state of the games industry, having different conglomerates and groups of people working on things. Kepler is a publishing label, and they have a publishing team, but the wider company is this like grouping of all these different studios that share their funds together to fund a group of studios. It's totally non-traditional. It's very, very unique. I think it's very exciting and interesting, and it means that there isn't this massive corporation. That Kepler is a bunch of studios that are Kepler, but it's not any one team. The publishing team is very smaller than people would think. Like it's this really fascinating thing that all of these question marks lead to this being Clair Obscur Expedition 33 being a game that, to my eyes, is produced in a quite unique way that do lead to it being an indie game in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I work for an indie publisher. Lost and Cult's an indie publisher.
That's true.
I don't think I think even in a more strict definition of indie, I don't think having a publisher is exclusionary.
Yeah.
I think that working outside of a more traditional publishing development environment is indie. Like, you know, if you're a team under EA, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're a team under EA, there's going to be certain sort of EA side requirements on you. There's going to be sort of best practices and workflows and ideologies that are going to be governing your work. You're going to be beholden to them for a lot of funding, right? Like there's just going to be a lot of dictation from the publisher in that relationship. Yeah. But there's also
a big one would be greenlighting. The process of getting your project greenlit by the greater company is very different than the idea generation that happens outside of even games that are published by companies are not necessarily greenlit by them. It's a very different can of worms.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you're just a developer and you make a game and then that's picked up by a publisher, that's very different than if the publisher is the one sort of creating the environment within which you're making the game. Mm-hmm. And I don't think, and like a lot of, like we have a good friend, Timo, who a co-host of our movie stuff, is working on an indie documentary, and a lot of his work is getting it funded.
Oh, yeah.
It's not coming out of his pocket, right? Yeah. And no indie project is strictly coming out of somebody's pocket. There's funding opportunities everywhere. Yeah. I think this is all just sort of preamble for my agreement with you that I think that Expedition 33 can be considered indie. I don't really see why it can't be. Mm-hmm. I that game got a Game Pass deal. You imagine that that was a pretty lucrative Game Pass deal. You imagine that probably was either a nice cushion of profit or a nice.
You know what's going to be even more lucrative?
The
next Game Pass deal that Sandfall Interactive gets when Microsoft comes on their heads and says, "Please have your game on Game Pass, please."
And they would be so fucking dumb to take that deal. I think
that's actually very true. I do agree with that.
Yeah. But I don't know. I just think
you have. By the way, because Sandfall, you have two people here who I guess you did buy the game, but I didn't buy the game. I know
I did.
plenty of people who
I did.
I know plenty of people who would have bought
Yeah.
the game if it was not in Game Pass, and I'm one of them.
Yeah. I think it's very clear that Sandfall as a team sort of governed the creative direction of this game.
Yeah.
We know that it was gestating for a very long time with a very small group of people who had a very clear vision, who then scaled up and then were able to get the support they needed to really make it in my view, don't kill me, masterpiece that it is, by getting Kepler's support.
I didn't know this was a hot takes video.
And everything that comes with that. So, yeah, I think that's fine to call indie. I think, though, that this just invites the problem I have, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Of, okay, how can we possibly look at this as indie, and then a game that we both love, like, consume me as indie? Consume me, this project that has been, and everyone should go listen to your great dev dive with the team about this, long. It took forever to make by a very small team. They stayed small to the end. They worked with a very small publisher on it. And it's a very modest success, if it's even made a profit yet. I know that just based on the way they're talking about it online, maybe it quite hasn't yet. And so that's, how can you say that in Expedition 33, which is this game of infinitely more resources and infinitely more visibility and acclaim and cachet, how can those be the same?
Yeah.
How can those both be indie?
Well, and that's what, again, I agree that is an issue, but again, my mind frames it as that is what's so exciting about the breadth of possibility space in the way that games can be made, and why it's so cloudy is, yes, those can it's crazy how different those games are, and from every scale or every angle, and they can both be considered under some banner, but then contrasted against games that they are very much not like, that are from more rigid structures that have long established multiple thousands of people working in publishing and marketing at much bigger teams like Ubisoft or EA or Activision or whatever. Those two games are much more similar to each other compared to something bigger. But it's all a gradient. There's people and games at every different scale along the spectrum.
Well, let me put it this way, right? Because again, as we mentioned before, that this conversation is in part inspired by the Game Awards.
Yeah.
And a show that we're both a big fan of, Critical Error. Shout out Jake and Peter. Just recently did their episode.
By the way, I've rescinded.
PGA.
I'm not a fan anymore.
Why?
I don't know. It's mostly a joke. I haven't listened in a couple weeks. But, well, the incident. It was the incident.
Oh yeah, we can't. We're not at liberty. I think Jake and Peter made this pretty good point about the indie category in their episode, which is like, if you look at the 6 games that are up for indie, which I believe are Absalom. Hold on, I got this. Absalom, Blueprints, Expedition 33, Hades 2, Silksong, and something else.
Fuck, what is it? It's not Consume Me, even though it should be.
No. But this is key to my point. What the fuck is the other one? Hold on. Loading. TGA 2025 Indie Noms. Hold on.
It's Ball Pit.
Thank you, Ball Pit. Thank you. As they were saying, this sort of represents a nice breadth of genres. It represents a nice breadth of scales of indie development. I believe that Blueprints is a more modest production than a lot of the things in there, for instance. But, and this is partially just an issue with TGA, but I think it's interrelated enough to raise. It just feels a little wrong to me that Supergiant and Sandfall and these teams take those slots. It just feels wrong to me. It doesn't mean they're not indie, but it just means that, when we're getting to the end of the year and we're looking to advocate for the best of the best, right? And we have this opportunity to raise up games that are sort of, I think, sequestered maybe unfairly, another interesting Critical Error point, into this Games for Impact category.
Interesting, yeah.
Something like a Despelote, even putting, which I've not played yet, but I want to for the end of the year.
Yeah.
Putting something like a game like that has such a strong base of support for, and it's such an interesting game. Also published by Panic, but a much smaller thing, or even things that are totally outside of this realm that we love. WS Number Factory, Spilled, all kinds of interesting stuff.
Yeah.
To have those things have to compete for a 6 slots against these things that, to the point you're making, I think you can, for as similar as Expedition 33 and Consume Me or Blueprints or anything, as many similarities as it might have, there really are a lot of similarities in number of people, budget, etc. between Expedition and the next game over on a AAA side. Mm-hmm. It just bums me out that these games take up the oxygen. It's the same way as when you see a Tetris Effect at an indie showcase, or you see PlayStation say, "We love indies. Here's Kena and the Bridge of Spirits." I'm not raising any of these as a quality judgment. I actually am a big fan of basically every game I've mentioned in this video. Yeah. But it's just to say that as the industry is making indie more of a thing, making it a priority, all the major platform holders love to talk about the support of indies.
Yeah.
Feels like a lot of it is trending towards the upper end of visibility and marketability. And I just think that in an environment where discoverability is maybe the biggest challenge that a lot of developers face.
Sure.
It just feels bad. Even if I can say, yes, Expedition 33, I can look at that and say it's an indie game, that's fine. It just, look at all the games we're leaving to the side.
I totally agree. And here is where I find it, this because I agree that I have that same internal judgment call of the passion that I have for so many of the games, especially that I've done dev dives for, where I want to do a lot more championing of their work, and I'm still to this day shouting out Foul Damage, which is the first dev dive I ever did, made by one person and a couple of her friends. That is a game that has totally gone by the wayside and would not get into these kind of conversations because it doesn't have. I mean, I think it could be a marketable game, but they didn't have the marketing budget. They didn't push it particularly hard because Red Nexus, the Peglin team, that is the publisher of that game, but May works for the company. It's a weird thing. Again, another example of how odd things are is, so if May Gardens is the developer and Red Nexus is the publisher, is that not an indie game? But she's a part of the team, but her name and the publisher is where do we go from there? There's a lot of question marks. It's all
it's all scrappy.
I have this excitement and this energy to want to champion these games, but the thing that I keep thinking about is, then are we drawing a line at, if something is indie, it can't pass a certain bar of success. You can't have too much exposure. You can't have too much conversation. You can't bring on too many team members because you need to support this project that is suddenly blown up, because then it's not indie anymore.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, because if it's
Let me give you some examples. Examples. Balatro, Animal Well, Silksong.
Yeah.
Beautiful examples. I would never look at that list of indie games and contest that Silksong shouldn't be there. Now, Silksong, in terms of the money it's generated, in terms of the opportunities that Team Cherry has at their fingertips, the way that they had the industry and the community in a stranglehold for years, doesn't change the fact that they are extremely indie. And they shouldn't be penalized for that success. I feel the same way about Local Thunk and Playstack with Balatro.
Sure.
I feel the same way about Shared Memory and Big Mode and Billy Basso with Animal Well.
Yeah.
I just think that there's a difference between finding some sort of massive success with your indie project, or coming from a place where that success is, if not assured, pretty damn likely because of everything you have access to. And I think that Supergiant's a beautiful example of that. Supergiant is indie, sure, but also, they are a long-standing legacy team that is being, chased down by every publisher. Nintendo published their physical version of Hades 2. Yes, sure. Nintendo's sending out press on their behalf. This game has been through rounds of early access. That's very different from being Billy Basso and then having this massive visible success with Animal Well.
It is. But again, and maybe I'm not thinking of necessarily success as only how many copies did this specific game sell.
Sure.
I am then also thinking about it in terms of that history, in terms of that legacy. Is that, I agree, yes, everything you said about Hades 2 specifically, very accurate. We think then about Supergiant's history and how they go from making it's like a I think it's like a maybe 5-person team making Bastion. They see success with that. They build up. They make Transistor. They make Pyre. That doesn't do quite as well. But then Hades really blows up, and that is the only reason that they have grown to the size that they are. The identity of the team, I believe all the founders are still there. They may even be still in like the same area, or like they might be using some of the same equipment. The team has only grown because they have seen success, and then because they are successful, they get these opportunities. And so it is their skill. It is their popularity. It is the fact that they've needed to grow the team to support games that continue to get bigger and more popular that then clouds a little bit of judgment of whether or not they should be considered in this category. Where something like Silksong, and if we talk about the team size being majority factor or main factor, yes, the small team that worked on that game for so long is absolutely indie. But there was never any financial pressure on that team from any angle because they sold 20 million copies of Hollow Knight. And so that team just was able to cook as long as they want. But that's a very different reality than Jenny and AP making Consume Me over the course of 10 years. Similar time scale, but they were scraping by. And the only reason the game got a couple extra months of polish is because they won an award. And then like these questions about financial realities and the scales and the stakes behind the development, like the lines are so gray. And I question if like getting support from someone from any kind of other team, precluding the team, the admittance that the team that worked on it should not fall under this label. I find that quite questionable.
Yeah.
Just because it is such a gray thing that can change on a dime, and that's the thing that I think is really confusing about indie is if X is true and X is true for a team, and then they get a publisher or they get a funding or someone publishes their physical copy, then does that the identity of the team didn't change?
Here's a question for you.
Didn't really change. Yeah.
On that exact point, would you say that Mojang is an indie team?
I think that
And I'm talking about right now.
No.
Yeah.
Not anymore. I think that and again, this is the problem. I don't know where the line is. But I do think that the growth of that team, the acquisition of that team, and I think more than likely, though I don't know exactly the current inner workings of Mojang, I think that they would not, it would not be surprising to find out that there is some sort of, there was some sort of change in the way that the game's direction was developed as the game grew and became a corporation in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's as simple in this case as when they became a Microsoft game studio. I think they stopped being indie.
Yeah.
And I think there's a point where the material reality does supersede anything else. Of like,
sure.
Okay, Microsoft now owns you, and like you're working under their infrastructure. I think you're probably not indie anymore.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I completely get your point. I think that it. I think what you're indicating is there would be a risk in wanting to pull up the smaller projects that you are precluding things at the top end. Mm-hmm. And I think that, again, that invites the question I was raising before of, okay, well, what do we do with those games that feel like they're walking outside of the bounds of independent development? Here's something I was thinking about. Mm-hmm. And I think this sort of indicates to me why indie is a flawed term.
Sure.
There would never be a best AAA award at the Game Awards.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that that's important because then what is it saying that all of these games are indie? What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think actually now is a perfect moment to bring in Murph's comment about the marketing and the general idea that indie is a term that can be used for things other than simply describing production reality. Murph says, indie doesn't describe a certain game type. It describes a certain audience. Unfortunately, I cannot come up with an elaboration for that. He says, looking at the clinical definition, indie means independently published. So then, Cyberpunk 2077 would be indie because CD Projekt Red is the developer and publisher of that game. But Stardew Valley wouldn't because Concerned Ape is the developer, but Chucklefish is the publisher. Which we know couldn't pass the vibe check. Ergo, it's nothing to do with the game feel and more about how the audience perceives it. And that, I think, is very interesting, especially in the context of the Game Awards nominees for Best Indie, Best Debut Indie, is the reason why I don't take as much umbrage with pools of nominations, specifically at the Game Awards, as I feel many of my peers do, is that I see these, and as we know from how the voting system works, as an aggregate of the general opinions of the voting body. Is that it would be fine by me if they wanted to set specific rules for what could be nominated. That'd be a very interesting thought exercise. I'd love to see how that would change things. But as it exists now, the voting body is a lot of people passionate about the industry, experienced with the industry, and when they think of indie, here's the games that they think about, here's the games that most people voted for. It is that vibe check. Here's the examples that most people agree, that most people like and most people agree are indie. But what was the question?
It's more of a statement of, isn't it peculiar that there would never be in a AAA category, best AAA game?
You're right. Yeah, okay, so that's where I got off track.
And then you brought in Murph.
Yes. Fuck. But the reason why I think things still stay conjoined in some way in the indie sphere is that for people who are interested in indie games, whatever that means to them, I find, and again, could be a projection, but at least from what I've experienced and what I know about the wider industry, is that people who are interested in their definition of indie games are very likely to want to seek out other indie games, whatever that means to them. And I personally can attest to this as someone who discovered Steam when I was in middle school, learned about indie games by watching Indie Games the Movie, played games like Fez and Shovel Knight, and really loved them, and then used that interest.
And you also love the people behind those games and everything they've ever said, right?
Yes. Used that energy of learning about indie games, whatever that meant to my 15-year-old brain, and would trawl Steam for games that had the indie tag. And discovered all these weirdo fucko games. There's this game called David that to this day I still have as my background on Steam. I discovered this game called Cora that's like this low-bit thing. I was 15 years old playing these games, and the only reason I gravitated towards finding these games that are very different genres, they look very different. I don't know the full development realities, but I'm sure they were made by different sizes of teams, because one person making a game is very different from 10 people making a game. We'd still consider 10 people making a game indie, so then like scale gets weird. It was all because it was indie. And I see that reflected in a lot of the tastes of people that I know of whatever you have as indie, you're interested in exploring and discovering new games that can fit under that label. Yeah. Regardless of if they're similar in production reality, in genre, in visual style. Because there is a vibe. And that's the problem with this. This is ultimately it's a vibe word. There is a vibe that Stray shares with Fez, even though those games were developed very, very differently.
Do you think for you would be able to put, even if it's just like, even if it's not complete, to words what that vibe is?
I think, yes. I think that a big part of why these games are grouped together, even though they can be worlds apart in reality, is that they are in many ways, and again, this is not a all-encompassing black or white thing, different from what the mainstream is doing. That there is a general understanding of here's the genres that are popular, here's the visual styles that are popular, here's what the biggest, most established historical teams are doing, and this is not that. And that is what excited me so much about discovering different kinds of games and seeing what these teams were doing, because it expanded my understanding of what video games could be. And again, I want to be very clear, yes, that's my vibe check. It is different from the mainstream. But also, Dragon Drive is a game that nobody else is making. Wouldn't call that an indie game, even though it is developed by a small team within a large company. It fits into that in some ways, but in some ways it doesn't. And also, I was thinking about this recently. Yes, that's my definition. But that doesn't mean an indie team can't make a game that is really fucking generic and totally similar to something that other people have been doing. It's not black or white.
Or I mean, or that
You seem like you're about to vomit.
I'm trying to. I need to frame this right.
Yeah.
There
You can
is
work your way
a
through it.
mainstream indie game. There is
Sure.
a series. There's a set of conventions or genres that are at this point very much typifying indie
Yeah,
development.
totally. Yeah.
Roguelike, deck building, cozy farming,
Yeah. Pixel art.
etc. Games that are exactly like Balatro, games that are exactly like Vampire Survivors.
Yeah. And, well, but to that point, that those genres evolve over time. Is when Vampire Survivors comes out, there's not another game like it. It's made by what? Two people, one person. No definition in the world will not consider that indie. But
Right.
now that we're seeing games that are very similar to Vampire Survivors be made by bigger companies because they're capitalizing on that, suddenly it feels different. The vibes change.
But what I'm saying
It's
is
mainstream.
that what I'm saying is that there is a type of game. I think it's fair to say that there are going to be types of games that are going to be picked up a lot by a developer or whatever. Like
Sure.
I think that you can that as the indie scene has become more of a mainstream, marketable, very profitable thing.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that we've seen a sort of convergence around a lot of ideas that are popular. We went from having seldom few Metroidvania titles in like the late aughts to
totally.
now look at where we sit now, and there's a Metroidvania coming out like every fucking week.
Yeah.
And this is in part because of the principal games, your Guacameles, your Hollow Knights, whatever, that suddenly became a type of game that an indie team can make and can get the funding to make.
Sure.
And that's not that dissimilar from the trend chasing that happens in AAA. It's actually exactly the same.
Yeah.
And so I think I like the definition you're putting forth because I think it's a bad definition, and I think that that's useful for the point that I think that it's tricky. I think it's tricky to define indie as what isn't the mainstream, because then I would go ahead and take a lot of things that we would consider indie out because they fit into an indie mainstream.
To your point, mainstream evolves over time, and also there are different levels of mainstreamness.
Yeah, I mean, let me give you this example, right? Because I don't play nearly the amount of indie games you play. I play a good number a year that I like a lot, probably more than the average person, but fucking a fraction of what you do. But
if I had a longer mustache, I would twirl it right now, just let you know.
But I'm sitting down at my desk every day, I'm putting in my earbuds, and I'm listening to a ton of music every day. Mm-hmm. And most of that music is going to be from Playboi Carti. And when it's not from Playboi Carti, it's going to be from underground artists who are traveling in the fucking tens of thousands of monthly listeners on Spotify range. And for contrast, I think Carti's at like 50 million monthlies right now.
Yes. No. I'm actually just surprised to hear that, because all you talk about are the mainstream artists that you're a very big fan of, and you listen to all their albums on repeat. I had no idea that there was this fucking dark, twisted side of Abram's mind where he liked things made by small teams.
Man, it truly spoke like the man that has a music channel muted in our Discord. Is all I'll say on that front.
That's actually true.
And the point I'm raising with this is that you wouldn't be able to define a lot of underground rap, in particular that I listen to, as being different from the mainstream. And bear with me, because this is an important point. That is mostly music that is just simply not produced in the label context. And there's going to be a difference in it because of that. I mean, you look at what a lot of labeled artists are up against, and they're going to say, oh, I've been told by my label not to have songs that get over this amount of time. I've been told by my label I can't drop my album now. Mm-hmm. What you get from a lot of underground artists is a lot of music, just fucking constantly releasing music, because they're outside of this context, right? And that's interesting, and it gets their ideas to their listeners way faster than you might get out of a major labeled artist who has to have some big rollout for the album. If we're thinking about then indie in games again, and we're making, I think, an argument that maybe if it's not exact, there's still similar market forces that are going to govern maybe the type of indie game that a lot of small teams make.
Sure.
They're still going to maybe in some way be beholden to a publisher. They're going to be beholden to the whims of the audience, whatever.
Yeah, of course. Totally.
I don't. Then what we're left with, as you're saying, is this vibe.
Yeah.
And I just think that the vibe doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think, and then my takeaway from that is that I think that if the production is muddy and the vibe is muddy, then I maintain my position that I have no idea what makes a game indie. And the reason I asked you if you could define the vibe is because I could not. I'm not just saying that to support my own argument. I don't even know how I would go about unifying these indie games. If I sit here and believe, as I do, that Expedition 33 is an indie game, that Nubby's Number Factory is an indie game, that Consume Me is an indie game, just 3 of my favorite games of the year, right?
Yeah. Two of those are Dev Dive. I just want to say, card in the corner. And even Tucker Hazel.
And even among that, the Nubby's dev said their name in that video, right?
Ethan, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Ethan published that game himself. And Consume Me is not published by Jenny. It's published by Hexadecimal or something.
That's her and AP's company.
Oh, it's them?
Yes.
Then disregard this point.
Hexecutable.
Thank you. But the point I'm making is that I can't unite these in any way.
Here's a great example.
Yeah.
And this is the one that's been rattling around in my head. And one of my favorite conversations that I had on Dev Dive is with the guy that made Matt Newell, the guy that made Lush Foil Photography Sim. This is a game that is unlike anything anyone else is making. It is a hyper-realistic photography simulation game. It is made by him over the course of 10 years and around that, something like that. And about 2 years ago, if I'm remembering my timeline correctly, but at very least, very far into the development of that game.
Yeah.
And after he had published trailers online and screenshots and gameplay of his environments that he had made, Annapurna Interactive, he was pitching it around, and Annapurna said that they were going to publish the game, and they did.
Yeah.
And the game came out. The production reality of that game, for 90% of it, is one guy at his computer making something he thinks is pretty goddamn cool.
Yeah.
But then Annapurna comes in, and to the point of having a publisher, again, it's not cut and dry. They helped him QA it. They helped him get it translated. They did a little bit
things
of
he couldn't do
on the trailers, get it into a showcase or not, because he's just a guy who has never made a game before. And he has no way, unless he teams up with someone more experienced than himself, to get this project that he has been working on by himself into the hands of people and let people know about it. And so that's a prime example in my mind of why I think it's not cut and dry of publisher, no publisher, self-published,
100%.
not self-published, because the story of Ethan and the story of Matt Newell are pretty similar, but at the home stretch, Matt got the support to have the game translated into a bunch of languages and to get QA. Whereas I think maybe Ethan got some friends and some community members to QA the game a little bit, but he put the game out himself. And it's the change at the very end that I think is a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on, when it's a lot more gray than that.
100%. But I mean, to go back to the reason I was bringing this game into the conversation, and for the record, I think that that's about as indie as you can possibly be, that Lush Foil game. Yeah. I just think that, here's my question, I guess. What do we do? If we both sit here, and I think we can largely agree that it wouldn't be fair to say that you're indie or not indie if you do or don't have a publisher.
Sure.
If you do or do not
by our perspective.
Yes. Yeah. If you do or do not get funding from big people. If the production context, team size, budget, anything isn't the factor.
Yeah.
But then if we then also say artistically, mechanically, systemically, visually, in any way, we can't unite these games either. Mm-hmm. What do we do?
No, you're right. I don't know.
And so how does that, but then, okay, so let's make it specific. How does it sit with you that we don't know what to do?
Well, I came into this, if you recall, it's a long time ago. You have a goldfish brain. It's fine. I'll reiterate. You know what I've actually been watching? They'll just come up my feed. It's Mr. Beast style videos. They're edited kind of,
sure,
frankly, a lot like this guy, Russ Vandy, who makes Nintendo videos that we've seen a few of. And also Ants Canada, he's this guy that does ants videos, but they're edited like Mr. Beast videos. I'm not fucking joking. Ants? No, he has ant terrariums. That's his thing.
Oh,
they're fucking fascinating. These are great videos.
Sure.
They're edited to every few minutes reminds you what the video is aiming towards. Wonder what's going to happen with this. But before we get to that, this is that moment in this video.
Of course, sure, of course.
I came into this video saying that I think the term is useless, and that actually excites me. And so when you question, what do we do? I'm like, amen, brother. To me, it's like period, end of sentence. Cool. Like, I like the fact that all this stuff is nebulous because it means that someone can develop a game for 7 years on their own and then get a publisher right at the end of the line. And that means that most of the time spent playing that game or making that game is not that different from one guy making that game and then publishing by himself at the end. Or you can get funding, or you can not get funding, or you can be acquired by a company, or you can grow your team. You can bring a friend on, and like, I also am someone who views like, I'm very hope-filled when it comes to like the development of games and stuff. And so I'm like, everyone's a friend, come on board. But like, bring in extra people, support your work, collaborate with others, and I don't want to draw boundaries to where someone who, if a team is 15 people and they made their game and they got a publisher and they feel very strongly that was the identity of their team, was this scrappy team making it, and then they got a publisher at the end.
Yeah.
Saying that they're not indie, like, and maybe this is just me trying to be nice, I guess, but I'm like, they would probably consider their work indie. And so I don't feel I'm at liberty to draw the boundary and say, no, because of this, you are not. And so I don't want to do a definition. I don't want to do restrictions, because I do think that what is exciting about the current state of the games industry is that we have all these different pathways for someone to make a game and see success or not see success, because indie does not mean anywhere close that it's going to be a good game. It doesn't mean it's going to be a successful game. Getting published by a publisher doesn't mean your game's going to be good or successful. Being owned by a publisher doesn't mean it's going to be good or successful. None of this fucking means anything anyway, unless the game is good.
Yeah, but I agree with literally everything you just said. Literally everything you just said, I agree with. But I think the difference for me is that then maybe I shouldn't be calling anything indie.
Sure. I actually like that. Because one of the things that I was thinking as we are bringing this conversation, and by the way, I think we should get some community stuff soon. We've been
the community submissions are kind of sometimes bad. Our conversation's so good right now. Let's fuck them. If we get to them, we get to them. They should be better at their job. We don't ask them for much. All right,
that's true. That's true. But I think that, to your point, and this might be something that helps you, is if you're about to think about using the word indie, and this is a thought exercise to everyone watching. Sure. Think about what is it about that term that I think is important to relate to this game, whatever game you're using it to refer to. And if it is the team size, then call it a game made by a small team, small dev team. If it's made by one person, call it a solo dev game. Use those terms. Don't necessarily use indie. If it's self-published, use that term. Yeah. I love games that are self-published because it means that there isn't an outside force. There isn't these market pressures on it. Use the term self-published. Don't use indie. Because, okay, you could say independent. I think that's true. I think indie and independent are actually different even if the root is the same. But use more specific terminology to describe the games you're talking about. If you believe that is important enough to, in whatever way, claim an identity of an aspect of the creation of a game, use specific enough terminology to raise that up and to put forth the game as this is what's important about it.
Yeah, I think that's really important because I think what it comes to from me is I think sort of my my cynicism in this conversation is in part I think to maybe unpick sort of the way that this term is wielded by the industry, and I think what you're illustrating right there is that I think we have a lot of power as players to use vocabulary that is more maybe accurate. And I think that's totally right. Because I think I just resist the idea of indie as a buzzword. Because I do think that it actually does become exclusionary in the way that we are both trying to avoid. Just in a sense of, okay, well, if we strictly say what's indie is what Nintendo, Microsoft, Xbox, and the Game Awards as an institution hold up as indie, well, there's a lot of awesome stuff that is as outside the parameters of that conversation.
Yeah, of course.
And so I think it's just, I think the onus is on us as players to understand the limitations of the term, the strengths of it too, but the limitations, as you're saying, say, okay, well, how can we describe the games in a way that is more useful? Because to your point, I think there is a lot of use, as you're saying, in indicating if something is self-published, or if it was made by one person, or if it was made by that small group. I think those are all very useful. I think you and I have had very fruitful conversations this year out of speaking about Expedition 33 in particular, not as an indie game, but as a game of its fidelity and quality made by 400 people. Yeah. And that has actually been incredibly instructive, right? So I think that's like the main... If I could have people take anything away from my point of view in the video, it would be just be mindful of the sort of things that maybe fall a little bit outside the mainstream connotation of indie, and use the language that we have to explore that space and explore the way you talk about games in a maybe more precise way. Same way as that, it might not be helpful to like call I was actually watching your reaction to the nominations, the TJ nominations video, and you're making the point about how funny the action adventure category is. Just in the same way, it's not useful to refer to a lot of those games as action-adventure. It might not be useful to refer to a lot of games as indie.
Well, but here's the thing that just generalizing the frustration that many people have about terminology, and I think indie is maybe the most intense one in conversation, but is that I like what you just said about action-adventure specifically, and also extends to indie, is you say that it might not be fair to refer to those games as action-adventure, as indie, whatever. In each individual context, I think it's fair to call those games, insert term. But then when they're grouped together, it highlights the fact that the term is vague and that we don't actually know what it means. When you play a shooter, when you play a Metroidvania, you're like, okay, action, adventure, like that's fair. But then you see it, you're like, Metroidvania and a shooter aren't the same genre. But they both are action. They both are adventure. Like that is it's so funny that on individual case by case basis, it's pretty easy to throw terms at something and see it stick and be like, yeah, sure. But then when we come to realize that terms are vague, when we pit games that share terminology next to one another, and then that ends up by juxtaposition, it ends up highlighting their differences rather than their similarities, which I think is why there's so much controversy.
I want to put something in your pipe, and I want you to smoke it. All right. I'm taking a brief look back over the damn nominees to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn here, talking out of school.
What's the tallest tale you've ever told out of school? in inches. Okay, continue.
A lot of festival movies, right, that then get picked up by distributors. They don't then exist in popular conversation as festival movies or as indie filmmaking.
Sure.
They exist in conversation as the genres they belong to.
Sure.
I think it's peculiar that doesn't happen for games. Mm-hmm. And I think that what you're pointing to with this point about the issue comes when you amalgamate them.
Yeah.
This would be exactly the same as if you try to do the same for movies. Because it wouldn't make sense. What would be unifying those things? I just and it reinforces to me this point of why would you, of all the tools in your tool belt to describe these games, why would you say that they're indie?
Sure.
And maybe our community submissions. By the way, I love the community. I lashed out. I love them all individually. I shake the hand of anyone in our community if they ask me to. Actually, there's probably been some really hateful people we've had to ban from Discord, right?
Yeah,
I wouldn't shake their hands.
Those people are part of our community.
Yeah, I think to our credit, we keep it pretty. We there's some good parameters around our community.
No.
Speaking of parameters, we're not letting fucking horse shit fly in the Discord.
No, I mean, well, you see some of the things Phil says.
Yeah, well, we can't. He's grandfathered.
The horse shit clause.
Yeah, I'd be interested in some of our community submissions here. If anybody else could try to put into context why that term indie would be useful to them. Because I think the more we talk about it, I think what it boils down to for me is in what situation would I feel it useful to describe a game as indie?
Sure.
And if the answer is, okay, when I'm talking about their production, when would it be true that would be more useful than saying, oh, this is a team of X number of people, etc.?
Or if you're just trying to describe the vibe, then just say the genre. The only instance that I feel confident or comfortable in using the term is to the point I was making earlier, in this nebulous vibe that I have, that many people share, that of course we all have our own definitions for, but in the where that Venn diagram meets of, okay, a lot of people are okay with calling X indie, is that if I want to say if someone asks me what's my favorite indie games, I could give them a list. If someone asks me for indie game recommendations, I could give them recommendations. In the vagary of that term, I can choose what I want to put in there. And I can put a whole slate of different kind of wacky fucking games from all across games history and all across the games genres and visual styles and stuff, and present this as like, you're looking for something cool, you're looking for something unique. That's what indie is to me. Is you're looking for something kind of interesting to spice up your game and diet, something you haven't tried before.
Donkey Kong Bonanza.
Here's the slate of games. No. There's too many Donkey Kong games. No. That game's fucking boring and stupid. I'm just kidding. I like the game.
All right, dig into the well. Pull something out. What? Cast your bucket into the well. Pull on the rope. See if there's some nice, clean drinking water.
What are you fucking talking about?
Give a community. Some community says something.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Let's see here on the Discord server. See, the problem with the Discord server is that we actually ended up talking about it, so it kind of muddied the...
Yeah, we did a little bit of a to and fro. Maybe we ought to start soliciting... Well, people... We have an issue with turnout sometimes. Voter turnout's an issue in all votes. Mm-hmm. But, like, we should just get people to submit, like, in a forum.
Oh, there's Google Sheets for that, or Google Forms. Yeah. Shit. Well, much cleaner is my Blue Sky, which got 7 comments, which I believe actually is a new record for amount of comments on a Blue Sky post. We got a comment here from MJ Smiles, who actually is product lead at Polyarch. They made Moss. That's kind of cool.
Oh, that's cool.
Get a game dev response here. MJ says, it's not a complete definition, but I think an indie studio has to be scrappy. And I think some amount of defying the odds is involved as well. Indies need funding too, but typically it is more modest, and then they go on to do a lot with a little. With indies, you definitely get more heart. How do you feel about that?
I don't agree at all. I'm sorry to MJ at Polyarch. Shout out Moss. I'd love to play that game. My PSVR made me sick, so I could, but I bought it.
Make your game more normal.
It's actually, I think it's mostly Sony's fault, because I played Half-Life Alyx. That didn't make me sick.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I think, so here's what I want to say, and I mean this in the nicest way possible. I completely disagree with this response.
Sure.
Because I think that this, to me, is the narrativizing of indie development that I disagree with completely.
Yeah.
Because
this is the last major thing to explore, and I think we should.
Yeah. Because I take massive issue, and this was really a talking point, I would say, last year as we began this really horrific period of layoffs along particularly AAA lines. And there's a lot of lines of thinking that, the future is actually in indie. Mm-hmm. But I just have to fundamentally disagree with that, right? I think that a lot of what is being mentioned there is this sort of narrativized struggle. The struggle that paid off. The scrappiness that paid off. The team that... odds. The team that defied the odds, a team that didn't get that much funding but made something amazing. I think that this is a narrative of that is a path littered with failure. And I have a hard time sort of looking to this as a North Star definition, because I think we can point to many indie games, define however you want, that just completely failed, because the discoverability issue in the gaming space is, in my view, maybe the most pressing crisis that the whole games space has. And so it doesn't really matter how scrappy you are. It doesn't really matter how much heart your game has, which I also think is, I would say, and I don't mean this in a mean way, you just have to accept that I have bad taste. I don't think I've ever played an indie game with more heart than my 5 favorite Nintendo games. I think heart is undefinable.
Abram, God forbid we ever do a video about soul and video games. I will go fucking feral.
Exactly.
I totally agree with you.
Exactly. And so I just worry about using this as the model.
Sure. Yeah. No. I this is something that you and I have long thought about. And again, why I feel indie is not particularly useful, why that excites me, and then why I do, alongside you, kind of reject a lot of what MJ is saying here, is that the games industry isn't cut and dry on any particular level. There are great games with a lot of heart made by 800 people. That I felt like when I played Death Stranding 2 and I saw the performances and the narrative about grief, I'm like, I feel heart here. Yeah. It moved me emotionally. And then I play a game made by one person and I feel the exact same thing. So it's not... And one of those games is made by they're both made by independent studios because Kojima Productions isn't owned by something, but Death Stranding 2 is published, so it's not independently published.
Well, the IP is owned by Sony, so it's just like it's
no,
right.
It's not.
Oh,
no,
right, because
that's why it's on
505 did all this horseshit.
505.
Oh, we can't live with them. Can't live without them.
But then also, I think that narrativization, I agree, paints scrappiness, paints struggle in a rosier picture than I think it reflects reality of the amount of failures, of the amount of people that put a ton of work and polish into their games and passion, and then didn't see that returned. Like that is true on all sides. One of the people that actually you and I talked to, Siaktro Marcus, who made Tori Saturn, has really been talking a lot recently on his social medias about how the game has underperformed, and that makes him question the path forward that he has, even though he loved making that game, and it's a game actually that both of you and I really love, and he put a lot of heart in that game. It did not mean success, and so I then try to champion games on their own merits, as we're saying. If I see a game with heart, it is irrelevant to me how many people contributed to it. If I see a game that I perceive as having heart, I would rather champion it for feeling the passion come through the artistic experience, rather than calling out the amount of people who then were able to bring that artistic experience to me.
Sniper Elite is a series where you can see a lot of heart.
Same with Mortal Kombat. Same with Surgeon Simulator.
True. That's probably the best example. Let me get a comment here. I feel left out, okay?
Well, that was my goal, so I guess I'm failing on that point.
Oh, fuck. My Discord reloaded. I gotta scroll back through all this shit. Do you have another one queued up?
Yeah,
Sorry, I
sure.
lost mine.
We got Hot Cider here, who actually makes very cool YouTube videos.
Yes,
Hot Cider.
Shout out Hot Cider, also thumbnail artist for Jacob Geller, also featured in both of our Jacob Geller books via Lost Cult. Buy them now.
Also has the Monty Mole from Mario Galaxy trailer as their Blue Sky profile. Hot Cider says, I guess it's a gradient, but I'd say the quote-unquote least indie a game can be to qualify. And here are Hot Cider's bounds to the definition of indie. Credit size under 50 full-time staff, not including QA, translation, and distribution. Under 20% of the team should have AAA credentials in their past. And it can be self-published by one of the quote-unquote indie publishers, Devolver, Annapurna, Panic, Finji, Kepler. Any of those particularly you want to dig into?
I kind of feel like we've litigated this, to be honest.
Well, the one that we haven't, that I think is very interesting and something that I've actually been thinking a lot about, is the idea of experience, AAA experience, in someone's past.
Oh, sure.
And that being something that really changes the way that you think about a game's production. In that, if Neil Druckmann were to leave Naughty Dog and get a team of 15 people and make a 3-hour game with cool production value and the storytelling that he's good at and great art, environment direction, the question marks start flying of how easy was it for Neil Druckmann to get the materials to make this game.
Yeah.
To get this support. Of course, if Neil Druckmann or insert X, Y, and Z person that has a lot of experience and is well known makes a game, even if it's on their own, they're gonna get the exposure by default. But then again, if I'm trying to make sure that success isn't a barrier, how much experience someone has is just a benefit to the quality of their game, but also sometimes it's not, because John Romero made fucking Daikatana. Like, I don't know. This is a really interesting one of like, and actually a good example of this year is both Clair Obscur and Dispatch, games that were made by teams, most of which were experienced from established studios.
Well, both from Ubisoft, right? Those are both ex-Ubisoft people. I think that started both those teams.
Yes, Telltale, and then they went to Ubisoft, and then they made Ad Hoc, but yes. Yeah, interesting. There's a lot of those, though. Like, fucking Davide Soliani, establishing his upcoming team, Day for Night, he made fucking the Mario & Rabbids games, which are very cool games. I'm curious to see what he does. The definition of indie on his plate, it's kind of curious.
Tucker, who started That's No Moon?
Oh, I like the way you think. That's No Moon Entertainment. Why are you thinking about that?
Just because I thought it'd be really funny if you had that off the top of your dome.
No, I don't off the top of my head.
You know what, Tucker?
I do follow them on Instagram, and they post every time someone joins their team.
Tucker, this point, simplest point in the whole video. All right, simplest point in the whole video. I don't care. Sure. It's irrelevant.
Yeah.
I think it's irrelevant if you have AAA bona fides, because what does that matter? Because you're not in the context of AAA production anymore. So that all it means is
leading Mr. Taylor Kurosaki, who was leading blockbuster titles like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019. And
that makes sense. I
like that because I do agree with that. Yeah, it's been something it's been rattling around in my head. But ultimately, quality of the game is ultimately all that really matters to me. Because someone who's really experienced with making games can make a dumb fucking game. That is not, and someone who's never made a game for it can make a great fucking game. That none of these bounds that we have are actually. They are in some way materially important to the creation of the game, but ultimately the product, the finished project, especially on the artistic experiential side, is what matters rather than any of the things that went into it.
Yeah, I mean, also just like imagine that you had an indie team that was made by 15 man indie team comprised 100% of ex-AAA lighting artists.
That's not going to be a very good game.
But what I'm saying is okay, so is it would it have to be less than 20% of people who worked in AAA but then also held the same role in AAA that they're holding in indie?
Yeah.
Like, do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense. Like, is it fine if they're all at AAA, but now all the lighting artists, some of them are fucking narrative designers? Like, I just don't see the significance. And also,
that's an interesting point.
Also, there are already plenty of indie studios and indie creators who have a much easier time getting funding than other indie creators who have been at indie the whole fucking time. So this doesn't pass the test for me.
Did you find one that you were going to read?
I did. Phil the Pill. It's time.
Oh, god damn it.
This is Phil as with the caveat that in this comment here, Phil is taking a good faith stab. I've not read the comment yet.
Very rare, by the way.
So I'm just teeing it up in that way, but I don't know what it says yet. An indie game, in my understanding, is a game that has been developed without traditional funding or support from the established gaming publishing industry. So a team that is not upfront paid by the likes of Nintendo, Microsoft, and its subsidiaries, Sony, EA, and such. Okay, then this is the part that I'm more interested in here. As such, its creative vision is most likely driven by a team that are so close to the actual development, if not the core developers themselves. This doesn't mean that there's a total locker relationship between the indie project and major game industry, because there could be deals that manifest as development progresses, but indie games are often a bit of a risk on the developer's vision. Taking a risk on the developer's vision, I believe Phil means there. I don't agree with this take.
Yeah.
And here's why. I think that this exact idea that Phil has laid out, and many people lay out this idea, can be applied to Neil Druckmann.
In what way?
You're telling me that Sony governed the plot, structure, pacing, violence of The Last of Us Part 2? You're telling me...
No, that's actually very interesting. I mean, there are actually a lot of examples of teams owned by Sony that actually talk about the fact that they aren't meddling in the direction of their game.
Yeah, I just think that purity of vision is something that I think we ascribe in a narrative way that has no bearing on the reality of how the game is made. I bet that there are a lot of people...
It also has no bearing on the quality of the finished project. So sometimes a little bit of meddling from the people that are going to be marketing it is actually a good thing. It leads to a better fucking project.
I think that if you asked a lot of people with complete anonymity within SIE in 2020 if they wished The Last of Us Part 2 had a different storyline, a lot of them would say yes.
Oh, sure.
And again, I don't know this for a fact, but all I'm saying is that I think it's very fair to look at a lot of auteur-led AAA projects and say that these people command a lion's share of the influence on the shape of their games. And that if that is true, then it cannot be true that indie is defined solely by this either. I think that there's an implicit... I think in a lot of people's understanding of indie, there is an implicit and very cynical understanding of AAA. And
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
And if I'm to respond to that, I also think that another point that Phil brought up here that many people would is that indie production, indie development comes with some sort of risk. We talked about that narrativization earlier.
Yeah.
And that if this doesn't work out, we might lose the house. Like that kind of like that kind of scrappy, like risking it all energy that certainly many games, successful and not successful on the indie side, have. That is a big part of their development. But then Silksong can't be an indie game because they have more money than fucking God right now. Or Eric Barone, who's been working on fucking Stardew Valley by himself, the music, the fucking pixel art, the design, everything, then he's not indie because he's not worried. Haunted Chocolatier is not an indie game, all right? But also, I think that also attributes risk to only small teams, where that's not true at all, especially not in the current games market, when Cliffhanger Games, established by EA to make a Black Panther game, when we see the initiative founded by Microsoft to make Perfect Dark, these massive teams, massive studios, collaboration with Crystal Dynamics, under these big teams, they're making this project. You can attribute, we don't know exactly, the amount of passion that the people had, whatever. And those games, for hundreds of millions of dollars and hundreds of people's lives, were a massive risk that did not pay off. And that does not make the canceled Cliffhanger Games Black Panther game an indie game because it was risk. Risk is also not attributable to either one because risk across all scales exists. And you're not safe if you're making an indie game by yourself just because you're making it at home. You're also not safe if you're working at fucking EA because they might pull the plug on like 3 Respawn projects in the course of a year and half that team has to go.
Yeah, I think we're hitting on something here with the way that people are implicitly thinking about AAA. Sure. I think that's very key. Because again, to your point, if a lot of people are going to take the idea of indie as to mean outside of the mainstream, then I think you have to have some sort of bias against the mainstream to begin with, to be interested in what's going to be living outside of it. Yeah. And so I just think that, I think we come from an interesting place where even if I am a more cynical person on a lot of game stuff than you are, we both, I think, have a much fairer view across the board of all different scales of production. And so I don't look at one as... I almost did it.
Don't do it.
I look at... I don't look at one as having more significance than the other.
Sure. Yeah,
I did a quick scroll here, by the way. I think, unfortunately, a lot of things past Phil's comment we've either directly addressed in full or part of a really good conversation we had. So I don't actually know if there's too much more in BLB submissions to look over. Do you have more from your Blue Sky?
I have more from Blue Sky. I also forgot that I got 10 comments on my Twitter post.
Cool.
On my Actually Everything app post. One of which comes from another friend of the show, Joe Richards, who says,
"Whoa,
I think games like Expedition 33 have highlighted how poor the concept of indie is understood. It isn't a stylistic thing. It's a development and publishing thing." This is Joe's definition. They say, was the game funded and developed independently? Then it's an indie. As lame as the answer is, any indie dev can make any style of game. Just because there are trends doesn't mean anything about what's actually possible in the space.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, as we mentioned, is I think somebody that has a very clear and defined take on most things in the world of gaming. I just don't think that their take is one I agree with here, and I think we've
Yeah.
kind of litigated this for the most part.
Yeah, and I was gonna reply to Joe's comment with something about how it's not particularly black and white. I established that earlier.
Yeah,
But Joe, if you're watching this, I do think that it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on how being published by an external publisher is not a switch that suddenly makes. Well, okay, it literally is a switch. It's a binary. Games are published by someone else, or they're self-published. Those are the two options.
yeah.
But I do think that I think as we presented here, that binary I don't think can or particularly should apply to the definition of independent development or indie development because of the litany of factors that we've discussed.
Yeah.
Um, we've got Frost of Rivia here who says Indie is when broke and making games in basement.
Isn't that a second wind person?
Yeah. The X second wind.
Oh, right. I remember reading some Twitter posts about that. I don't fucking know. Okay. That's kind of funny.
It's a joke.
Yeah.
But let's see who else commented here. We actually got Jonathan Holmes on Blue Sky.
Shout out Jonathan Holmes.
Leaving a comment. It says, I'm gonna read this word for word, and we're gonna piece it through. Okay.
Jonathan, I love you. Sometimes I think you need to give your messages a second pass. I'm just gonna.
Jonathan says,
here right now.
For development, it's a game where the people making it not paying for it to be made had complete recreative control. For publishing, it's when the people making it paid for oodling and distributing it by themselves.
Now, I believe you asked for some clarification.
Yes, and he said that imdling meant making, and I think the M must have been a typo. But I think it's interesting that Jonathan defines indie development and indie publishing as slightly different things.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, again, it goes back to what I was saying. Like, Lost and Cult is an indie publisher. We're publishing people's books. Sometimes books come to us largely fully formed, and we just publish them. And it'd be very different. Us doing that is very different from, I don't know, Random House doing that.
Sure.
So I think that's important, and I think that is partially what governs my view and your view, that a being published does not preclude you from being indie. There is indie and not indie publishing.
Well, yeah, and to that point, I do think that binary is too binary for my own good as well, because it also then attributes anything that is self-published to what degree, to what size, to what team size, to what support from a fucking government or whatever, or an IP or X, Y, and Z, because there are plenty of games that are published by the same wider team that also developed the game. A lot of people bring up Larian, and in Baldur's Gate 3, Larian published that game, CD Projekt Red. How do you then define something like Nintendo or Ubisoft? A Ubisoft studio is Ubisoft the same way that they're publishing. Ubisoft's publishing is Ubisoft. And so it's developed by Ubisoft and published by Ubisoft. And then Nintendo has teams that are Nintendo teams, the EPD teams. Then they own teams that aren't Nintendo, but they are owned by Nintendo in the same way. Like, the question marks really also start to...
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, it's not cut and dry. It's not black or white. Self-publishing does also not mean that there's risk, that there's creativity, that publishing teams within a larger team have control. It's really muddy.
Ubisoft has shareholders. Lost and Cult doesn't have shareholders.
Yeah.
I don't know if Larian's a publicly traded company. I think CDPR is. There are responsibilities that these organizations do or don't have.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and then what about a team like Remedy? They're publicly traded. They talk about their stuff all the time, but their creative control doesn't actually seem to be particularly governed by that, and maybe to their own detriment. They haven't self-published their games. They're going to. They've got the rights to Control 2 and Alan Wake for publishing, but it's very, very muddy.
So then anyway, hold up the sign. Don't say indie. Say something different.
And there you go, ladies and gentlemen.